Okay, this video I'm going to show how we kind of went about the Studio 5000 project that was used in the building a simple FactoryTalk Optix application. There was a comment shared by one of the viewers that had kind of asked, could you show the Studio 5000 project, kind of make a video on that. I didn't really show the details of that. I just kind of had something already running and then had tied Optix to it. So I'm going to put a link to that video here as well. But I had basically, there was a few things that I kind of did. There was a Studio 5000 project, of course, and then I was using the Factory.io software, which is a kind of a simulation software, digital twin type simulation software. So Factory.io is not a Rockwell automation software product. It is a third-party software, and been using Factory.io for several years in our classroom environment, and it works really well for a way to kind of visualize stuff. We can't always build these conveyor systems like you kind of see on the screen here, or robot systems, but we can simulate and tie real physical controllers to this Factory.io digital twin environment. So if you're not familiar with Factory.io, I have some videos on it as well, and I've seen many other people on YouTube have some videos on it. But basically, Factory.io, you can download a free trial. It's actually not that expensive of a software package for digital twin training. It comes in several versions. You could use what's called Ultimate, which basically gives you access to all of these controllers. Or you could just choose one of these controllers, the package for just one controller only. For instance, if you're only going to be doing Allen Bradley PLCs, then you could use the Allen Bradley edition. And you can either pay a monthly subscription or by the year, or just a one-time perpetual type license. The Allen Bradley edition does work with the Control Logix, the Compact Logix, and the Micro 800 family. So all the modern controllers, you can connect to them. And what I've done in some of these videos is I've used the simulators. So for instance, we have the Logix Echo to simulate a Control Logix, or now the Compact Logix L8 controllers. And then if you use CCW, Connected Components Workbench, you can use the Micro 800 simulator, and those simulators actually connect to this Factory.io environment. So that was part of it. Going back to the original video, if I just kind of jump ahead a little bit, kind of here to the end, what I had essentially built was a simple Optix application that kind of mimicked the tank, and I had the ability to control the fill and discharge valve. And then here in the Factory.io scene, we were controlling the fill and the discharge valve to fill and empty the tank. It's pretty straightforward. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the Factory.io software on my computer. And so first part is of doing what I did there was have Factory.io open, and we choose the scene. So if you're not familiar with Factory.io, there are several pre-built scenes, they call them, that you can just open up. Some of them are just simple conveyors, but there are two tank scenes. Scene 3 is filling tank with timers, and this one doesn't necessarily have a scene number to it, but it's called a level control. And the difference between the two is that this filling tank scene with the timers is going to use a discrete signal to open and close the fill and discharge valves. So it's like a solenoid valve in that it's either full open or full closed. So if I just give it a discrete signal, and it opens the valve, and I drop that signal and it closes the valve. The level control scene will use control valves. So in that case, we actually have to give it a numerical value to open the valve or close the valve. So for instance, we can pretty much reference it as like, 0 to 100%. So you're either 100% open, you're 50% open, 75% open, or 0% open, essentially. So we're going to give it an integer value. So that's the one I used in that project. So I'm just going to click on this, and that's going to open up the scene. Now, I don't really need to do anything. I could customize the scene, and you could build your own scenes. You don't have to always use the pre-built ones. But when you first open up this scene, what's in this tank is, we have a fill valve, we have the level meter, we have a discharge valve, and we have a flow meter. And that's pretty much all the instruments or actuators that we have here in this scene. Now, they do have the control panel here with push buttons and little digital displays. So they do have, you have the ability to kind of interface with these buttons if you wanted to, but I usually don't do that. So the next key to making this work is we have to go to the drivers. So go to File, then Drivers. And we need to choose the driver. So I have the Ultimate Edition, so I have access to all of the drivers available. But we can see under Allen Bradley, we either have a Logix 5000, the Micro 800. They do also offer MicroLogix and the Slick 505 drivers as well. So since we're going to use Logix, and that's what I used in that video, we're going to choose Logix 5000. Now when I do that, it basically populates these tags in here. The other thing we need to do, mine went ahead and grabbed this IP address only because that's what I've used before. But if you haven't used this software before, you need to go to Configuration, and you need to make sure you type in the IP address of what you're going to communicate to. Now, I'm going to use the Logix Echo emulator. That's kind of what I did in that video as well. So we have the host IP address, which is going to be the 127.0.0.1 for me. That's the loopback IP address. And then the slot and path. Now, since I made that original video, some things have changed perhaps, as well as since the last time I used this FactoryIO software. So I've got the Logix Echo dashboard up, and again, Logix Echo is the emulation software or the emulator for the L8 controllers, both the Control Logix and now in version 3 the Compact Logix. So we can actually emulate either controller as long as it's an L8 family. And then we have this chassis, virtual chassis, and then I can see here slot 00. I just have a CPU, a virtual CPU. I've called it Optix CPU. You can call it whatever you want. And it's going to be using version 36, and it's got an IP address of 127.0.0.1, and it is switched on. So this is in slot 0. So when I come back here to FactoryIO, I will need to change this to 0. So you will need to set the path or the slot, even if it's a virtual CPU, to where it can find it. The other thing about FactoryIO, by default settings here are these I/O points, and it creates basically tags here in FactoryIO, and they will start with this bool in or bool out or float in, float out, and then you have an offset if you want, and then a count. All right, so for the most part, we can leave these as is, and then basically when we see back here, this is what FactoryIO is going to expect to see from the controller. It needs to see tags in the control Logix that have this exact name. So the start, reset, stop, FactoryIO running, those are just discrete Boolean points that were kind of tied to these push buttons here. And again, we're probably not going to use those. Then we have the float in 0, float in 1, and float in 2. That's going to show our flow meter, our level meter, and our set point. So basically we're going to really just monitor these two tags right here. And then as far as outputs go, we have a couple of discrete outputs. Those are the lights that were on that control panel in the scene. But mainly we want to worry about the fill valve and the discharge valve. So we could actually get rid of these tags and not have to create them to simplify things, but we'll kind of perhaps leave them as is. Now, let's go into Studio 5000. So that's all we got to really do to set up the scene. Now we need to go ahead and create a new project. And I'm using version 36, and I'm going to, we're going to go ahead and use a Control Logix 5580. Make sure we pick a 5580. It doesn't really matter which one of these I choose as far as the Echo goes. I'm just going to choose the L81, and then maybe I will call it something like Optix level, and we'll say next. Version 36. It doesn't really matter as far as this chassis size for our emulation purposes. I'm going to go ahead and say it's in slot 0, and we will say finish. And that'll build the Studio 5000 project. Okay, so the Studio 5000 project finally got generated, and now we have a blank project, and I don't need to do anything as far as creating I/O here underneath the I/O configuration. I'm going to use the emulator. So you know, if you do have a project pre-built and you already have I/O cards configured, they can stay as is, and you can use them in the L8 emulator. In the Logix Echo, but to just do what I need to do for this, I don't have to create anything. But what I do need to do is I need to create controller tags. And to make Factory I/O work with your control objects, I need to make tags that match exactly what is shown here inside this box. So I need to create these bool in 0, 1, 2, 3. The float in 0, 1, 2, and then the bool outs 0, 1, 0, 1, and 2, and the float out 0, 1, and the integer out 0 and 1. And I need to make sure that when I create these tags in the controller that they match the data type. So this is a Boolean, this is a float or a real, this is an integer. So I'm just going to create here one real quick. We're going to let's create the Boolean, right? So we're going to match even case sensitive, and we don't need to create an alias, and we just need to change this to a bool. Okay, and we could copy paste to kind of speed up our next, but note that the data type still needs to be changed. Whoops. Getting a little ahead of myself there. Okay, so just create tags like that. That's all we got to do. I'm going to go ahead and generate the rest of these tags, and then pick back up here in just a moment. Okay, and we're back, and I've filled out the rest of the tags. Just to save a little time and not have to build all that in the video. Mainly, once again, we have the bools, the floats, and they're all been assigned to the right data type, and then the bool outs, the float outs. I went ahead and put a description for the ones that I'm going to be using at least. So the flow meter is going to be tied to float in 0, level meter tied to float in 1, and then the fill valve on float out 0, and the discharge valve on float out 1. Okay. Now, so that's all we got to do for tags, unless we got to create some other tag inside of here. Now, again, the way how Factory I/O works is that this fill valve and this discharge valve will be looking for a number between 0 and 10. That's kind of its range. So actually 0.0 to 10.0, because it's a floating point number. So what I'll need to do is, if I were to just type a number into this, if I go to monitor tags, if I go online and download this, if I just type a number in here, then I'll be able to control the valve. Okay. So before we do that, I'm going to download this project to the emulator. Now, in the video I made, I'd actually built some logic, and all the logic is I used the move command, so that when I had created another tag so that Optix would interface with the tag in the controller, and then I would move that value into this float out 0 or float out 1, and that's how I wrote basically a value to the control valve. But in this case, I'm just going to write it directly into this value here in the tag, in the controller tags. So what we need to do is, one, we need to make sure that our Logix Echo is up and running, and it is. So we can close this, just minimize this now. Now, since this is a new project, I don't have a path. So I'm going to go to Communications. I'm going to say Who Active. And that popped up over here in the other window. I'll move it here in a second. All right. So in our Who Active, we see we got this ETH1, ETHIP1 for Ethernet IP. We also have this Ethernet emulate Ethernet. That's the one I want to look at. And notice that I have a 127.0.0.1, and it has the name. That's actually what's running in there right now. That's the program that's running there right now. This 9310 WED 300 ENT, that's just basically the catalog number of the Logix Echo, shows up here for some reason. But if I try to find this emulated controller underneath one of these other Ethernet tabs, it's not going to show up. So we should have this emulate. I'm just going to simply click highlight here, and when I do that, these boxes are no longer grayed out, so I can either go online, I can upload, download. We don't need to do any kind of firmware update to the emulator, of course. So I'm going to say go online, and that will of course prompt me to make a download. It's going to say things are different. I'm going to go ahead and say download, and say download. So even though we're working with the emulator, the process of downloading is exactly the same. And now it says, we're done downloading. Do you want to put it back in the remote run mode? And we'll say yes. All right. So we can see now that we are in the run mode. Controller light is okay, and then we're in the remote run mode. Now, if I go back to Echo, there's really nothing here telling me that anything is running or whatnot. So this this is what's actually running the emulated controller, but there's really no visual indications that that anything is happening right now. Just again making sure that the controller is switched to on. That's all we got to really do. All right, so we got the logic or the program at least created. The other part of it was coming back to the factory I/O. So now I need to do two things. First, I need to go back to drivers, and I need to connect. So I need to connect the scene to the emulated controller. So I'm just going to say connect. Now, if I get a green check, that means we're connected. And more importantly, if I don't have any red error little badges pop up, this means that I have all these tags are visible and exist in the controller. If you did not, if one of these tags, if you didn't create one of these tags, you'll get like a red kind of badge right here letting you know that it didn't find that tag, and it'll kind of error out basically. So got to be connected. So right now our factory I/O scene is connected to our emulated controller. And the other thing we got to do is we got to make sure that the Factory.io is in the run mode. Okay, so now we're in the run mode. When we go in the run mode, our little editing window here goes away. Now, to kind of put this side by side as best as possible, so what I can do now is I could come here to my Studio 5000, come to my float out 0, and this is my fill valve. And if I just type in a value such as 5.0, well, we can see that the fill valve is now open and our tank is filling. Notice that this went to yellow in the Factory.io scene, whereas this is still white. So this is being actuated, and this has a value as well. It turned yellow. Now if I go ahead and put this back to 0.0, that closes, oops, that closes the fill valve and stops the fill. Now if I come to the float out 0, that is our discharge valve, and if I go ahead and maybe type like 2.5 here, since it's like 25% open, we can see that we are, the discharge valve is actuated and it is slowly emptying. We can see that we also had real-time indications here for our flow meter and our level meter. So we're seeing our level is 2.8 and our flow is 1.3. So we can use these tags. Basically, in that original Optix video, I was just basically reading these values and displaying them on the Optix screen, and then I was using Optix to basically interface with these two tags to control the opening and the closing of the fill valves. So that's all there is to this. This particular scene was kind of straightforward. There was only a few actuator points or feedback points that we could monitor. That's why it was a nice and easy kind of scene to work with. So if you're interested, Factory.io, once again, you can download a trial for this. Now, I should say that I use Studio 5000 and I use the Control Logix and I use the Logix Echo, but as we saw before, we can also use the Micro 800. And the Micro 800 has an advantage in that you can actually download the Connected Components Workbench software. It runs completely unlicensed and free, and you can use the Micro 800 simulator. So if you don't have a controller and you just want to really do something for free without having to purchase any additional Rockwell software, you could use a CCW software and use the Micro 850 simulator and do the exact same thing. As a matter of fact, I'll make a separate video that will show exactly that. So I hope this was helpful, showing some of the behind the scenes of the Studio 5000 and Factory.io, and then the original Optix, building an Optix, just basically showed you how I was able to take, build simple objects inside of the Optix HMI and link them to these tags in the Studio 5000 project.